My name is Jazz. I'm a cultural and medical anthropologist. I've been working in the space for around 8 years, and I'm really blessed and honored to be here today, bringing this panel forward. And yeah, I'll just introduce the name of the panel and the folks here, amazing people doing amazing, amazing work, some of whom I've had the honor of working alongside, doing some challenging work in the space. So yeah, today we'll be talking about, it's a guide to the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, protecting psychedelic churches through legal and ethical practice. So we have Martha Hartney over here to the left, Sean McAllister. We have John Dennis, and Joe Tafur. And our moderator is Allison Hoots. Thank you so much for being here, everyone.
Is it on? It is? Can anyone hear me? No? Yes? Put it to my mouth? Okay. Hold on. Oh. Do you want to come up? Hi, everyone. Welcome to Guide to RFRA, Protecting Psychedelic Churches Through Legal and Ethical Practice. So this is an incredible panel. Just the work and dedication and experience and knowledge on this stage is really remarkable. And I'm really excited to be moderating the conversation here. So the first question is, why is the guide to RFRA so important? And I don't think I can answer that because I wrote it. Yeah, I don't know why it's on the list. And I would just say it's great to read as an educational resource, and I hope everyone checks it out. And Shakruna has it for free on the website. And it's really helpful to understanding what we're about to talk about today. And we're going to move on. So, so we're going to start with Martha, but I think everyone should have an opportunity to say whatever they want since we have quite a bit of time on the topic. But Martha, why are most psychedelic churches not legal, despite claims and misinformation about it otherwise? Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, that's a big one. Can you hear me okay? The question as posed was a question that I've been asked many times. And if you know me at all, you know this is actually one of my biggest bugaboos in this space, is seeing organizations claim to be legal, particularly online on their websites, legal ayahuasca ceremonies. That's been going on for a few years. And while we would never capitulate to what people are doing as illegal, I would never suggest anybody agree to that statement. It's also an overstatement to say that a church is fully legal. To actually be fully legal takes a whole lot more work, and in this case, in the case that you'll be hearing about today, it took at least 10 years of work. And inquiry and time and effort and slow movement, and it wasn't an overnight type of thing. So when people say, oh, we're legal, they're missing a bunch of information, and they're misleading the public about what's safe, what they can expect to be able to stand behind. And I just think it's not really a wise idea to mislead people. Now, there is a difference, though, between between legal and defensible. And so those of us who are on this panel, we have said this many times. People may actually have a defensible claim that they have a religious right to use their sacrament legally, and we would stand by their ability to defend themselves. However, when somebody extends to somebody and says, what we do is legal, they are in essence saying, well, you're not going to get prosecuted. You won't get arrested. And that's actually not true. You may have a defense if you're arrested or prosecuted, that you're using your sacrament religiously, but that doesn't mean that you're illegal. So you still have to defend yourself. So anybody else want to add to that?
That's perfect. No, I do just want to start by acknowledging plant medicines and indigenous people who have stewarded them for millennia, and ayahuasca in particular has been such an important part of my life, and a lot of gratitude to Joe Tafur personally for the role he's had in my spiritual healing and the leadership he's taken in this topic. But yes, this is something that I'm trying to say things that you're not expecting today. So, what's swirling in my head is the challenge that Adana Amagwa talked to us about, that so many people say that they're an ayahuasca practitioner or a plant medicine practitioner, but what have they really done to claim that title? And when you talk about defensibility, that's what I'm thinking, is that most of the people I'm talking to would have a very hard time actually defending their practices, understanding we live in a society that has a very Western concept of religion. And so, Joe's church, and we'll talk more about this, they didn't really challenge the Shipibo lineage. But those of you that are really breaking your own ground and creating your own containers, I think, the point is the road from here might be harder, not easier, in spite of what happened with the Eagle and Condor Church. And so this is to Martha's point, that we haven't seen the government challenge Joe's practice, but they sure have the ability to challenge your practice. And the less lineage you have, the less the less formal or defined practice you have, the harder it's going to be. And I see a lot of very loose containers and a lot of messy philosophical and spiritual viewpoints around this work. And so just in terms of the difference between legal and defensible, I think that there are less defensible models than people think, that there really is vulnerability in spite of the progress we've made for some of these practices we see there, and that, like I said, the road may get harder. So that's my challenge, conventional comment today.
Hello. Yeah, in terms of the legality analysis of whether something's legal or whether it's legally defensible, this is kind of an area that I encounter a lot of confusion on, and I think that people think that because they're a religion that necessarily means that they're legal, but really it's as everyone here knows, and probably in the room too, it's a pretty long-winded analysis that looks at, are you causing or potentially causing harms that the government may have a compelling interest in avoiding. And so you could be, organized and go through this process, but, at the end of the day, if, you're doing things in a way that are reckless or potentially hurtful and people are actually getting harmed, there really is an opportunity for the DEA to come in and say, there's really no other way for us to avoid these harms than to shut down your religious practice. And I think that a lot of times communities don't really, some of them do, and those of us in this room are probably among the good actors in this space, is my assumption. But there are other people who really will use kind of the religious use defense or the opportunity to assert it in the future, really as more of like a loophole, as opposed to a legitimate, sincere religious practice. And I think that just because you're calling it a religion doesn't necessarily make it a religion. And and I think that that's kind of where it gets into this point of, is it legal or is it potentially defensible? And until you've had a judge sign a document saying that we're approving this, or the DEA has given you kind of a permit to import and possess or manufacture, then you're in this kind of area where you won't really know until a judge makes a decision on it. And so that's the kind of gray area that a lot of us in this room are probably used to navigating, but it's something that I think when people offer these really oversimplified solutions that, oh, all you have to do is register with the Secretary of State, now you're a 508c1a church, you're legal and you're valid, you're good to go, really misses a lot of the layers of complexity in this and could potentially result in people having legal consequences that they're not really expecting. So I think our job as lawyers and advocates is to really inform people that these risks are real, and you know, there's also a practical side of it too, that, you know, just because it is in this gray area doesn't mean you're going to be apprehended. And I think that contributes in part to this sense that a lot of folks that, you know, because some church has operated for months or years with no interference, that people develop this kind of lackadaisical attitude like it's probably going to be fine, and it may well be. But our job is to just inform people to make their own decisions and to calculate their own risk profile that they're comfortable with in terms of the criminal risks. So whether it's, you know, until you have that stamp from a judge saying that you're good, you know, you are going to be operating in a somewhat unknown status. Many times.
You want to skip this one, Joe? Or?
I guess I'll just say something brief. It's a kind of a legal question for the lawyers, but I would just say this idea that you're going to have to defend yourself is what I, you know, from as the client or what, you know, the person that's seeking the lawyer, it's that. It's like this whole idea is to be out and be accountable. And so whether or not this is the right pathway for any kind of community to go RFRA, but the idea is that you are going to seek being accountable in front of something. And so then so you can try to get a loophole, like he says, and just say, oh, we'll do this because they did that, or we'll do this because they, you know, when we started, they said, oh, you have to look just like UDV. You have to look just like Santo Daime to make it through. The lawyers are all advising that. And I said, well, they didn't win trying to look like anybody else. They won because they were who they were, and they were able to defend that. Like, well, we're not that. So then we are who we are, and we're ready to defend that. You know, and that's the difference. And I think the traditional way, like Adana, I didn't see her talk, but just talking to her so briefly, like the first thing she wanted to say to me was, you know, she's doing her training right now to become, you know, a curandera or whatever the title is in their community. And she's like, well, it's not just, it's like part of her thing that she has to do to get that designation is to serve the community. That she has to actually do a particular GoFundMe because she has a particular sewer service activity that she has to do to get the blessing of her leaders. And so it's like you have to serve a community. The community is the one that acknowledges, as far as defending yourself to a court, and what does that look like? The traditional values are that you would bring to that situation is, where is your community? How are you helping that community? If you are, hey, that's going to help you a lot when it's time to go out and speak up about yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of sincere religious belief. Thank you, Joe. So we know that the issue here is the Controlled Substances Act and state analogs. It regulates these substances to the point of prohibiting use, except for particular ways, and religious use is one of them that we're addressing here, religious-based exemption. And unless you have an exemption, you aren't, quote unquote, legal. But so Martha, to you, and then we'll just still come down the line, what does it take to actually achieve legal status relying on RFRA? And that's a whole book.
Write it.
Yeah. But why don't we just talk through the strict scrutiny analysis under RFRA? I think maybe would be.
Right. I won't give you the whole history because it'll bore you to tears. But in 1993, Congress took up the question of what religious freedoms are to be protected and under what standards. And in the law, the standard of review is the name of the game. Like at what level and what type of scrutiny, what type of analysis do we apply to any given legal scenario? And in the religious freedom arena, the standard under RFRA is called strict scrutiny, which says that when you have a sincere religious belief and practice, and you can prove that it's religious and then you can prove it's sincere, that the government may not burden that practice unless it has a compelling interest, and that their compelling interest is instituted in a measured, in a very, very narrow way in order to achieve the government's interest. So, of course, in the controlled substances arena, the government's interests are in diversion prevention, prevention of like black market trading illicit markets, and also harm reduction and public health and safety. So that's a pretty high bar. That bar was lowered in 1990 through a case called, what was it, Smith? Employment v. Smith case. And Congress decided that case decided by the Supreme Court was wrongly decided, and they passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to restore that level of scrutiny. So it took another, I don't know, it was until 2006 for the Controlled Substances Act to be tested under that standard with the Gonzalez v. Ocentro case, which we lovingly know as the UDV case. Through the hard work and effort of the UDV, their United States arm, Jeffrey Bronfman, and all of his efforts. So he was the sort of the first out the door, who opened the door for us. And then there was the Church of the Holy Light of the Queen v. Mukasey in 2009. And then it's been a drought ever since for 15 years. Nothing else has ever gotten through that door, despite whatever anybody else may say. There was only the two churches until last week. I'm going to turn it over to Joe for just a second. I'm going to turn it over to Joe and put you on the spot and just give you a moment.
What are we talking about? What was that?
Where are we?
The strict scrutiny?
How are,
Under which
I guess, how are you evaluated in the settlement proceedings? You know, it was basically a RFRA analysis off the record.
Yeah.
So whatever on record you can put, what was looked at?
Well, we had, and I don't know if there was this criteria from the Myers.
The Myers
right?
case, the USB Myers case.
So there was a religious criteria set in some previous legal precedent that in a court of law, what does a religion mean to them?
Right.
That you, in other words, that's the whole problem with this whole thing is how do you establish what's religion, here. Outside, but so that's the paperwork and there's that. And then there's this other thing that I was also talking about. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, well, who are you and who are you? That comes down to that in front of the community, in front of the society, in front of a court. But according to that criteria, what do they ask? They ask your state, what are your beliefs? What is your core doctrine? Do you have any scriptures? We said, no. Do you, because it's a oral tradition, behind this. So that was a big problem. Oh, you can't do that. Like, well, yeah, you can. That's not true. That you. So we were standing up. So from our side, what do they ask? What are your holidays? That's what they ask. What do you wear to the ceremony? Like those are the. It's like an anthropology.
The accoutrement of
the
religion.
Accoutrement of religion. Like that's when the DA came to the apartment. That was the grilling question, and I was like. Facing off with the Washington, D.C., they said, what are your holidays?
So they really were using these Western concepts, these Judeo-Christian concepts of religion and asking where you intersected.
That's the status of the situation, but it wasn't just that. They were coming and you had to meet them, and so there's still this reality piece. Mm-hmm. It's not just enough to check the boxes and that you have to present yourself. That's what we had to deal with.
Right.
So I think that's the difference. So everyone thinks, oh, can we just create a checklist and check boxes? And that's I don't know how that works exactly.
Yeah, well, you might be the only one who does know how it works.
That's right. That's right.
Well, we have our holidays. We already had thought of that. and we were ready to defend ourselves. We were serious about what we were doing and we believe in what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big part of the scrutiny was we had multiple plaintiffs on the case, and they were from diverse backgrounds, and they were people, so many of them professional people, for whatever it's worth, that were willing to speak up And so that was one of the goals, was to have a strong, group of people on the plaintiffs list. So I don't know. That's how we did it. We didn't actually. The other big thing, that's still the big problem. I mean, the reason UDV, and I talked to Jeffrey Bronfman the other day, is because he had money. Mm-hmm. So if you go down this road of this court road, they're going to drag it out and try to drain you. Right. And they didn't make it easy, and they weren't cool about it. They tried to dismiss it for years. Over 2 years, missing all the deadlines, blowing through everything. So we would not have made it through if our team of lawyers didn't take on that position eventually to say, we're going to work on contingency because we think we're going to win. And so now on the RFRA, because they're infringing on your rights, they pay your legal fees if you win that lawsuit.
Right.
We would not have made it without that. So that was another one, like the legal team to be willing to do that. Right. They still haven't been paid. Martha, Sean, Jack Silver, Gil Carrasco, Ismail. Here he is, Ali. So these guys, that's how we did it. So you need lawyers that are willing to put in the time and hopefully get paid later, or you need a lot of money. Mm-hmm. The other thing we had a lot of strong support from, we do from our different roots organizations, from if it's the Shipibo lineage down there praying for us, or the people behind the Pachacuti Mesa tradition, and also our Dene, connections in Arizona praying for us. And that was very supportive, to what we were doing. We believe that made a very big difference.
Right. I mean, the definition of church, as problematic as I find it in a lot of ways, it does include basically community.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
It is community.
It is.
I was going to jump in on that.
Yeah, Sean, go ahead.
I mean, my observation, in addition to what Joe said, is that, they didn't want to mess with Joe Tafur and Belinda Aracho, a Navajo Dene Zuni woman, and some of the founders of the church. And the government is scared of this issue because I believe they know if Joe and Belinda and others in the church got on the stand or went to deposition and had to answer questions, that it's going to create a precedent that if you are sincere and you have lineage, that you're connected to a lineage, that they don't want that kind of precedent. And so what we saw is them resisting at every stage. Every time we asked, we want to depose your government agent who says that ayahuasca is dangerous. Oh, well, maybe we should ask you some questions and then we could talk about settlement. They just resisted at all points, actually letting us ask them the hard questions. They wrote this ayahuasca risk assessment. Speaking of Joe's comment about community, we give thanks for Chacruna's contribution to raising money for the lawyers and the legal fees at the beginning of the case and throughout. And one of the things we revealed for the first time in his case is that they wrote this ridiculous in-house assessment of ayahuasca and pulled pieces from studies about vaporized DMT and recreational DMT and said that ayahuasca has a cardiac risk and it's dangerous, and citing studies Martha dug through that they misquoted them. Just a completely dishonest appraisal. But they didn't want to answer questions about that because they knew it was dishonest, and they want to keep the possibility that they could try to raise that against somebody else. So I just think, Joe's case shows that plaintiffs matter, and they have challenged others. I mean, it's not like everyone's gotten a pass. The Soul Quest Church of God in Florida had a very different result. They were denied a petition from DEA. They're stuck in the courts. The government's fighting them to the death. The Arizona Yahe Assembly in Arizona and California is stuck in an endless litigation that they seem to be resisting to the death. Not to the death, but the point is that I think they look at cases and decide, can we win against a Joe Tafur? And if not, we're going to find a path to settlement. But if they think you're vulnerable, like Soul Quest, unfortunately, and these other churches that they've resisted, I think they will not do what they did in this case, and they will resist you and fight you as long as possible.
Anything to add? I I just want to say a little. There is some secret sauce here, and you're right. It is Joe Tafur and Belinda Aracho, Rodney Garcia, Cable Wright, Ben Sullivan, and Joey Bellis, and those are plaintiffs and the board members, and they were the secret sauce. And it was not going to look good if we put them on the stand. The government would not know how to handle that. So they are the secret sauce in this equation. And also, their story was very, very compelling and very easy to tell. And if you read the complaint is publicly available. You can email any one of us, we'll get it to you. It was written over 9 months. It wasn't just slapped together. It was a very coherent story, and you can tell when you read it that the story told in the complaint matches the plaintiffs. Their stories, their identities online, who they are, who they show up as in the world. So when you put those together, you get a very clear picture of integrity. And it's very hard to deny that. So if you are in this world or you're a lawyer in this world, start looking at those things. How can you tell a story in a way that people just can't resist it and know what's true, and true is true? And here we are.
And just a quick note that Sean mentioned, I didn't get a chance to say it yet, but Chacruna, that in the early, back to the community piece of it's through community that first FOIA request, this document, he's talking about DA risk assessment document, that's basically a fraudulent document that they resisted showing it to us for over 2 years. Exactly. And we said, this whole Quest case, they brought up this document. Where's this document? We want to see, what is the assessment of the risk of ayahuasca that you're out? They said, well, because of our DA ayahuasca risk assessment, we have to destroy it if we find it. Well, let's see, what does it say? It was over 2 years of holding that back. During that process, and the initial part of the case, was the community. Chacruna hosted a fundraiser for us. A lot of people that are connected to Chacruna and this community supported us. We raised over $50,000. That was enough. We didn't have money. We didn't put money towards that. So thank you to the community again. How do we build community? Yeah, we're out there trying to help people. We're out there doing what we can. That's what it took. A lot of ceremony.
I think we could say, and it took almost all, maybe more than that $50,000. This is the kind of level of commitment. First of all, I don't know if Martha said, but you can't just sue the government and say, I'm an ayahuasca church, or I'm a church that uses ayahuasca. You have to be interfered with. So that's the prerequisite before you can even litigate these things. And yeah, if you're serious about wanting to litigate it, then you need to, unfortunately, you're going to have to hire experts. We hired, expert toxicologists, and, without going into too much of the detail, you're going to need some expert to show a court that ayahuasca isn't dangerous, that it's not going to kill you. And these things, they don't work for free, unfortunately. All the lawyers work for free, but till the end of the case. But so that's a point about Joe's making. If you're not supported by community, none of the churches I work with have an extra $50,000 sitting around, so you need to think about it in those terms as well.
Yeah, so there's the money, but there's the credibility, right? And we're fighting against the Controlled Substances Act, which the government has already demonstrated they have an interest in applying and preventing people from using these dangerous substances without their supervision. And I think that leads into the question with John, which is, as a result of the drug war and the Controlled Substances Act, there is a strong negative stigma and a bias associated, with the Controlled Substances Act, but I guess also with religion. So I always joke that the people who take psychedelics don't like religion, and the people who are religious don't like psychedelics, and I'm really excited to be in the middle. But if someone doesn't feel comfortable with the idea of being part of religion, are there legal protections available to spiritual or contemplative? I don't know what that is, but religious communities, spiritual or, I don't know what the other word would be, spiritual communities who work with psychedelics, I guess, who don't want to identify with religion?
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can answer that one. That's good.
So, I talked, when I was kind of working around the Measure 109 rules and trying to shift those into a more kind of softer, gentler, more flexible direction, more community-centric direction. One of the things I heard a lot of was negative pushback that, why are we going to protect religious use as opposed to any other valid type of use that we might explore? And it's a really fair question. And, currently under our legal system, we only have protections for religious freedom. We don't have the same type of protections yet for community freedom or spiritual freedom. There are freedoms of association and other types of freedoms that might arise, but in terms of having to couch the defense or the argument under a legal frame that's like well established and viable, religious freedom is a pretty good one to explore for that. And I think when people think about religion, they typically think about kind of the thing that traumatized them in their youth, at least in this country. And that's not what religion has to be necessarily. Religion is people coming together and like I think Joe was talking about, courts have these tests where they look at the different aspects of it, but religion doesn't have to mean dogmatic, it doesn't have to mean judgmental, it doesn't mean, closed-minded. And in fact, I think, there's a lot of examples of really positive, religious actors throughout our history, like Martin Luther King or Gandhi or other people who've had a really positive impact. Like religion itself doesn't have to be this tainted, awful, horrible thing. And so the question is like, what about community? And at what point does a community that works together become a religion? And when new religious movements are formed or created, there's kind of not necessarily like a magical point where you go from like secular to religious, but just to think creatively about what religion is, it might not be the same thing that we think of and have been traumatized by in our past. And a couple examples I'm quick to offer are like Zen Buddhism, for instance. It doesn't necessarily, in most forms of it, the ones I'm familiar with, don't really require a particular belief in a god or that sort of thing. It's really focused on a practice of mindfulness, a practice of contemplation, and a way of sitting. And of course, there's community aspects of it, and there's other aspects of it, but there's not dogma in it in the same way that I think many people expect. Same thing with unprogrammed Quakerism is the other really great example I'm familiar with, where it's not about belief in anything in particular so much as commitment to a set of practices that people come together and work in a set of practices. And so in these kinds of things, you can start seeing where a community, so-called secular community, could start taking on characteristics that look very religious, even if they don't necessarily call themselves religious, even if they don't identify as being religious. That's not necessarily what's required. So, there is this, you can't say to a court that these people are entitled, at least at this point in our nation's jurisprudence, you can't say that they're entitled to spiritual freedom. You have to say religious freedom, but when you say religious freedom, it can mean a lot of different things, and it's a really flexible designation that could apply to a wide range of different communities, as we see in the litigation.
Let me just jump in and say what this is bringing up for me is that I'm based in Colorado, and what I spend most of my days doing is explaining to people, yes, you could be a church and claim a religious freedom exemption to use psychedelics, but in Colorado, we decriminalized for psychedelics. You have no obligation to show any religious sincerity. And so when we talk about reform, I believe in an intergenerational movement that treats plant medicines in a respectful way, intentional way, and that it is a spiritual practice. But this is a long-term project for a culture that for 500 years, or really 2,000, back to Roman times or before, has been going in the wrong direction. So in the meantime, I think that any talk about reform has to center decriminalization in your states. And so we don't have to meet this level, and Joe deserves the recognition he got, but most people engaged in these practices are experimenting, learning, hybridizing, and they probably don't meet these standards. But if you have decriminalization, what I tell people is you could go through all this rigmarole like Joe went through 3 years of litigation, or you could just come to Colorado today and sit in circle. And so, no, but I think it's a bridge from what John was talking about, is that if, for most people, they're not going to be able to meet these standards. And if you want broad access and equitable access and social justice, then probably religious freedom is not the only path we need to have. We need to have multiple paths.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think Martha gave a great overview, but I love to think about the fact that RFRA was enacted in response to a failure to protect the indigenous use of peyote. So all of the rights protected thus far under RFRA, including a lot of Judeo-Christian cases, Hobby Lobby, which they didn't have to provide coverage of birth control because they were Christian, and all of the cases that have come subsequently were because of a sacramental use of a controlled substance, which is pretty amazing.
Can I add something to that?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, because RFRA actually didn't protect the religious use of peyote for the Native American community directly. They actually had to fight even harder, even longer, to pass the amendments, the peyote amendments in 1994. So RFRA didn't actually do it. That served a different agenda. It happened to come out of a peyote case, so they still had to keep fighting.
Yeah.
So.
That's true. So it's the American Indian Religious Freedom Restoration Act that, is my understanding, not RFRA itself, that protected peyote formally. But as to your point, this is a law that even religious conservatives love because they want to use religious freedom to deny women birth control, but they also have to acknowledge that means that people can use psychedelics for religious purposes.
Right. And when it was enacted, it was specifically to protect the religious minority. And yet the majority also uses it. So when we're thinking about this guaranteed right to religious exercise and the protections that exist, I think even acknowledging that the Controlled Substances Act, the way it's been enforced in the drug war, has been a bit of a farce based on a lot of misinformation and racism and all sorts of other issues. But there are best practices, I think, that we've all spoken about, not just in the sort of practical aspects of minimizing the government interest in health and safety, which has involved screening people in advance of ceremony, and prevention of diversion, which means record keeping and storing your sacrament and only certain people accessing it. But, what are the ethical practices that you each would say are so important with these communities, I think, to destigmatize and to move us in the right direction in other pathways as well? Start on the end. Yeah, that's a big one.
Do I have opinion on that one? Oh, yeah.
In your humble opinion.
In my opinion, I think like the number one thing that I would say is an ethical consideration is adequate training. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to in the last 5 years who've said, well, I've gone down and done an ayahuasca journey. I did the 8-week course on how to be a shaman, and now I want to open up a church. And I'm like, gosh, me 5 years, at least. I know people get the messages from the medicine that they need to do something, that they need to carry the medicine, or that they need to help in some way, because it does feel so intensely needful. And I absolutely want to honor the instinct and the impulse to help, and also to suggest that we slow down and we take our time. Medicine's not going anywhere. Take your time, learn your trade, learn your craft, learn from people who know, and stay connected and integrity and alliance with the people who teach you. So I've actually turned away probably 30 people who've asked me for help. I'm just not going to do it. So that's it.
Joe should talk about this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a code of ethics, as an organization. So yeah, of course you have to be ethical to do it. And what does that mean? And, you know, so this, to me, it's so important, all these opportunities, whether it's through DCRIM or through RFRA, whatever the opportunity is, there's accountability, you know. And so in the underground, there's a lot of shadowy spaces, you know. So everyone's always, to me, this is my opinion, and, you know, of course you have to be careful. Everyone's worried about, oh, too many people are going to come forward. It's like, yeah, but at least we have a chance to make them accountable to what they're doing. So one of the ethical things is that you want to be accountable to what you're doing. So if you're not interested in that, that's probably not a good path for you. You know, so that's one. And then that affects all the other things, all the other code of ethics issues that come up around, you know, taking good care of people and not harming people. And so the training and the adequacy around that is related to being careful. You know, if you're not careful with this, is it a problem? Yeah, it can be a problem. So that's what everybody's worried about. You know, and we don't want to talk about that too much because they think, oh, you don't want to cause problems, but that's why everybody's worried about it. So everyone says, oh, I got called from this person, or this happened to them, but they didn't have proper support. They didn't have enough guidance. So we're like, yeah, this is something you have to be careful with. And that takes time to learn about things like that. You know, it's not, you don't have to say like, oh, you know, oh yeah, you know, turn on YouTube. Let's figure out, well, what should we do? You know, what's the situation? You know, versus like, oh yeah, I already did this before. I already been down this road because, oh, my teacher, you know, we'd already did this, and you know, we've been down the road. It's not the first time that I'm seeing this. I'm not testing it out to see how it is, you know? And so there's experience to be gained. Not everybody has access to that experience. There's a lot of people hungry to learn, to participate, but still they have to be accountable to that. It's not enough just to say that I'm enthusiastic. You know, that's not gonna help when you go talk to the mom, when you go talk to the brother, oh, but I really wanted to do it. You know, I'm sorry. It's like, well, that's not accountability. That's what it looks like. You can go ahead and tell them and own up to it and deal with it and learn and grow. You know, but I think those are the kinds of things that are important to consider, you know, when you're doing it. Is like, it's about taking care of people and being responsible. And this thing about, you know, that, like, somebody brought it up the other day. I heard someone say that, you know, all the people that get invited, oh, the medicine told me, or all that stuff, the medicine told me that I'm this. And it's like, okay, well, somebody said, well, you can get the invitation, you get the acceptance letter to the university. That's not the same as getting the degree. You know? It's like, that would be ridiculous. You could show everybody your acceptance letter and see if they let me, okay, I'm ready now. You know? So it's just like, we have to get out of that, you know, and we're trying to get out in the open, and we're trying to get stronger, but we have to raise the bar a little bit. You know, it's like, we're past that now. We know enough now. The community knows enough now. The community that comes to Chacruna that knows enough that's ridiculous, guys. You know, that's enough. It's more than that. It's learning more than that. You're offending the people. You're offending the ancestral cultures, you know, that are simply just trying to say this to you and share their experience with you. And over again, you know, blow it off. That's like, that's very disrespectful, and it's ignorant. Ignorant meaning, like, you will grieve your ignorance. Okay?
Just jump in on that, Joe. And stop me if I'm saying too much here, but in terms of your case, I think once you get past the assessment that they think you're in a sincere religious practice, that is mostly what they're focused on, is the ethical, safety, diversion. How are you preventing the sacrament from getting to kids? How are you preventing anybody from walking in and opening your fridge and chugging ayahuasca? And so, you know, they do require things like put your ayahuasca in a locked refrigerator. And I think many ayahuasca churches have agreed to, or people that use ayahuasca in a religious context have agreed to do that. I have other clients that say, I would never put my sacrament in a locked box. And so where are we going to be if we refuse one of those requirements? Also, again, on the safety front, again, if I'm saying too much here, they talked about things, the government said, well, we want a sober person. at the ceremony. And I give Joe a lot of credit for standing up and saying, well, that's not the tradition, like maybe somebody there would be sober, but if we're trained practitioners, we know what we're doing, and that's an example of the government looking for ways to, in their mind, to make this safer and to prevent anybody from getting hurt. But you may have to stand up and say, this is not consistent with our spiritual practice, and we're not going to do it. And I give Joe a lot of credit for doing that. So yeah, that assessment of safety, security, how are people going to be protected is a big part of what will get you pretty far with the government.
But in a decrim, you wouldn't have to lock it up in the, right?
True.
It's for the DEA, and that's for international importation, stuff like that.
Yeah, in some of my conversations with Jonathan Goldman, who was one of the plaintiffs in the case that Martha cited earlier, the Church of the Holy Light of the Queen versus Mukasey, a 2008 federal case out of Oregon, where the church sued for the right to drink daimi. One of the things that was really interesting about them, Jonathan Goldman said that basically in every single ceremony they do, every person takes some amount of daimi without fail. And sometimes, and they'll even, my understanding is, give daimi to children at certain ceremonies, and it's considered what they call a ceremonial dose, so it's like a sub-hallucinogenic dose. But there are things that the DEA might not like, but I just really appreciate Joe's comment earlier about, this is what our church, this is what our practices are, and because we're sincere, we're not just going to mold them to fit the way you want us to look. And, but with that, you also have to make sure that what you're doing is actually safe. I mean, these substances are extremely powerful and can, result in really great positive benefits to a person, or they can also destabilize people in ways that are not necessarily positive. And I think churches really ought to take extremely seriously the potential that they could be giving somebody a substance that could be powerful and destabilizing. And the amount of seriousness with which they take what they're doing in administering these powerful substances really will help to really drive, the analysis of whether, the church is basically acting in accordance with the law. Because if there's not another way for the DEA or the court to ensure that you're doing a good job with client safety, or your congregant safety, then they might not have another choice to deny your legitimacy as a religious organization using psychedelics. So I think some kind of screening process is really important to have, to just make sure that you're keeping a handle on what who you're giving to. Substance-wise, and so that most churches have some kind of medical screening process that they go through to ensure that they're not potentially causing those particular harms. And then the other big one that I encounter a lot is around informed consent, that in order to give informed consent, there's a whole lot of risks that you have to disclose. And if you don't disclose those risks, they don't have the requisite information to give informed consent. And so to be just really upfront, and, churches will have long waivers that disclose all of these potential risks. And I think that some people object to that, but I think that, it really would make it easier. Those are the kinds of things that the DEA likes to see, and I think that it's honestly best practices to make sure that, you're really, supporting individuals making decisions that are in their own best interest.
Those are great answers. I agree with all of them. I think it's interesting that the Controlled Substances Act has actually worked against these communities, and people were afraid to give informed consent before and actually disclose what was happening, and they were afraid to call emergency services when there was a severe reaction because of the law prohibiting it. And so the thing they were trying to create safety on actually created more danger and harm. And I really do think, we all see the ways that legal exemptions would actually increase safety, for accountability, for disclosure, for ethics, for what we say, just writing it down so I didn't forget everything, but experience, right? I mean, if there was the ability for eldership and sharing of practices through generations, people would be more experienced. They could go seek a teacher. So I think that's all why we are doing what we're doing. How much time do we have, Jazz? 25 minutes, my gosh. Okay, so we're gonna get into, we covered all that, that's great.
Spice it up.
Yeah, well, we're about to. This is spicy. What are questionable practices you've seen by churches? Please no names.
Please, no names.
Oh, yeah, I'll take one. Okay. Mail order.
Mail order.
Please don't do that. It's pretty clear that that's more trafficking than providing a sacrament. And even though someone's intent may be pure and true and whole, it's just not going to fly yet. So just give it a minute. So I wouldn't do that.
It's a good start one. I always tell people, just because somebody else is doing it doesn't mean it's legal, okay? And lots of people are getting away with a lot of things. And that's kind of the environment John was talking about, is a lot of the people that talk to me say, well, why do I have to go through all this rigmarole? Like, who's actually getting in trouble? And the government in Joe's case filed a motion that said, you can't even sue us because we're not enforcing against ayahuasca against anybody. Well, but then secretly, part of the FOIA request, we found out they're seizing hundreds of ayahuasca shipments. They're turning them over to local law enforcement, and a lot of times local law enforcement has taken some action. But in terms of risky practices or bad ideas, Allison and I might have worked on a case together that when we talk about informed consent, I am getting nervous that lots of people are taking plant medicine or some type of medicine that it turns out they didn't know what it was, that they test hot on a drug test, that it's starting, plant medicine world is turning into some sort of fish show with candy flipping. It's like psilocybin on Friday night, ayahuasca on Saturday, wachuma on Sunday. And usually sometimes two of those on one night, right? But really the more important point is just, we're starting to see threats of civil litigation. I tested hot on a drug test. I didn't know what I was getting. And there's kind of a lot of fallacy out there about some of the analogs or things that might technically be legal. So you can take the MDMA molecule and you can break a carbon chain this way and make, what I don't even know the names here, but it's like analogs that are similar to a controlled substance but not technically illegal, and therefore I'm working with a legal substance, and and these things, some of them have been designated as adulterants or toxic. Thinking of sassafras and some of the other novel molecules that people are working with, and yeah, I just worry that people are giving out stuff, designer molecules that will hurt somebody. Nobody knows what's in them. And so back to Allison's point, like we really shouldn't be doing that. People should know what they're taking. And you shouldn't pretend that your substance is legal because it's an analog. I mean, there's still risks with these synthetic analog molecules.
I've seen business practices. I mean, if your church looks like a business, it's probably not going to necessarily. It's going to attract some questions if you were to be called to the carpet, so to speak, to defend what you're doing. In fact, in the Soul Quest denial letter, one of the things that the court cited as being potentially problematic was that they kind of smelled like a business to the DEA, and that was considered a factor. It's not. There's not one factor necessarily that is dispositive. It's a whole set of factors that the court considers when it's assessing these cases. But, one of the things is if this looks like a business and people are making substantial money on it, then maybe the goal isn't necessarily religious in nature so much as economic in nature. So that's something that I've seen come up quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that because we're talking about decrim, we're talking about religious freedom, but then even let's say you pull all that stuff off. Let's say you legalize, or you achieve that stuff. You say this doesn't really meet Schedule 1 criteria. This isn't really like honest, the way it's playing out. So in Peru, in Colombia, for example, where it's legal to regard as a sacred plant medicine, did not fall under that CSA. There's still a lot of problems. So it's not just that they're a church or they're not a church. It's like you still have a lot of problems of power dynamics and people taking advantage and sexual misconduct. And the same is happening in the psychedelic psychotherapy world. That's also, legal. I'm just saying that happens in psychotherapy. Yeah. So it's just the same ethical realities of human beings. They're there and they have to be addressed. And it's not just because it's legal or not legal or because you blocked the people from doing or you didn't block them from doing it. So all those things are also there.
My husband says, humans be humaning. And it does happen in every positional power situation. But you are very vulnerable post-ceremony, but in any sort of transformational experience like therapy or religion without psychedelics. So yeah, accountability everywhere, really. But it does help when it's legal and you can report to someone about it. I mean, noting how little that has done in a medical sphere, but yeah, ideally. I think some of it comes from shame, right?
And I just want to add a little piece here. Is like
just filling time here.
We're kind of kindergartners in this arena, and we need to learn. I am a huge fan of Kailea Taylor's book, The Ethics of Caring. Huge fan, and I highly recommend that. In fact, I won't even talk to anybody unless they read that book. So. I think some grace can be given for things that we actually don't quite know about yet. We do need to have a safe place to talk these things out. I'm personally very interested in the concept of like belief transmission and insertion, which is a little bit new to me, but makes a lot of sense in a psychedelic space that's a little elevated from normal consciousness. So, it would be awesome if we could to have more dialogue about where are the potholes and the danger zones.
I think there's also this kind of growing concern, I think, within the broader movement about the emergence of cult-like dynamics within psychedelic religious settings, and it's something that as people in this space, I think it's something we really need to be mindful of, and I don't really hear a lot of talk about it because it's one of these things that gets used against us. So I think that there's a resistance or a fear of talking about it internally because we kind of get on the defensive about it and sort of thing. But I think that the leadership structures within a religious organization are something that are really critical, and that power is shared, not just centralized in a single person, but that there really is something that really does distribute it across the organization in a somewhat equitable manner.
Yeah. Just gonna name drop Sacred Plant Alliance for our talk tomorrow morning, which is an association of churches that create self-governance and accountability systems as an example that we hope others will adopt as well. But that's, a professional association, which, lawyers are part of, doctors are part of. I would love to see more just regular religious practitioners a part of with real accountability, not just burying it quietly. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, Sacred Plant Alliance, do it. You guys, I talk to the people. I mean, I have my vote for, I'll say it here publicly, like get a group of them together and go for the exemption and force the exemption, in a group, in a strong group. I think that's the only way you're going to affect that policy. They won't just sitting and, whispering guidelines to them. I don't think they're going to respond. If that's the way. I mean, we're talking about religious freedom, there's decrim, there's all these other pathways, but if that's the pathway, then that would be one way to do it. I think that just on the topic of the religious, this idea of religious trauma and people don't want to hear about it, or they don't want to have to call it a church, or they don't want to have to do it, and which is fine, and you don't have to. You can go this decrim pathway, but right now for the federal level, it is required. It's one of the pathways, and that's this one. And so then our thing is that spirituality, like you could be cutting yourself off in a kind of a strong case against religion. And then the society or the next generation or whatever it is cutting themselves off from spiritual practice, because that's not whatever, that's traumatic, that's not good. But spiritual practice is maybe very vital to spiritual well-being or holistic well-being or health and wellness, And so I think that one idea that I'm interested in and just always encouraging or looking at is as we explore the role of such a community organization or a spiritually driven organization, whether they have business practices or whatever it is, that it should be healthy. Like it should be encouraging the people, the community, some aspect, not, but mental health shouldn't be getting worse, So that's like a cult, it's a way to assess that. It's like if you have a cult and now mental health is getting worse, actually. Like if you had an outside source assess the mental health of these cult followers, I think usually it's not better than the people who aren't, lost in that.
Yeah.
So like assessing, your physical wellness to whatever degree that's relevant, mental health, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being. And then we also have like the new measures that are coming out of psychedelic research, connectedness, like how is your relationships going to yourself? How's your relationships going to your other people in your life, your intimate loved ones, etc.? How's your relationship to the world, to the universe? Like those things should be getting better if it's a bona fide spiritual practice. Like that's my interest, and I think it's based on the ancestral belief system personally, is that the spiritual practice is for that.
Right.
It's for spiritual well-being. So if we get religious trauma is when we're just telling, I believe this because I told you because I'm right and you're wrong, and we don't know why we're doing it. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, no, that's that. Spirituality is about you, like your growth, your wellness. That's what it's for. That's why. So then for us, that we were coming under they're like, okay, you're ayahuasquero, you say medicine, you guys say medicine. Your culture says medicine, and but you should go to the FDA because you say medicine so much. This isn't religious. And so they say, don't say that. Don't say medicine in front of them, back to the same thing we were talking about before. It's like, no, actually, no, we can say it because that's how they always say it. Mm-hmm. We're here. This is the United States. This is North America. This is the Americas. It's called medicine. Mm-hmm. That's how they talk about it. But in the culture, what does that mean? In the culture, it means that it's something that is bringing, improvement to your holistic wellness and to your relationships. And so for us, that's like health is that, and spirituality is the same thing. Yeah. It's the same thing. So then the cults and everything, they have to stand that measure. It's not enough to just get loud and see how, explosive you can be when you talk to try to it's like, are the people getting better or not? How are the children doing? That's what we want to know, Yeah. That's what it is. So it's like, that's what I said when they would tell me, you can't talk like that. You can't say those things. You're always talking about helping people, healing. And I'm like, well, I say it all the time. I just want to say it again here because I like saying it so much. It's like, spiritual practice is spiritual healing. It's like, yeah, shipibo, curanderismo, that kind of work with ayahuasca ceremony, it is considered spiritual healing. Mm-hmm. That is the tradition. It's a medicine person. It's for that. But what does that mean? They say it means the same as for us, the song is medicine, the prayer is medicine. So spiritual healing is spiritual practice, and spiritual practice is spiritual healing. So if you're talking to me about your spiritual practice, I want to see like how it's helping the health of you or your community or your wellness or your relationships. And all the psychedelic psychotherapy research right now is supporting those same ideas. So I don't know, those are important. It's important in bridging the worlds of like Western thinking or religious trauma or secular thought and the spirituality and something about the nature of our universe, is like that there is something going on here, and the alignment that we're talking about, trying to move towards, is related to that, and so that should demonstrate itself, that the proof is in the pudding, like they say. I shouldn't have to convince, it should show itself.
Yeah, that's amazing. I just want to say I love the reclaiming of religion as a term and reclaiming of the term medicine, not just to cure and fix something, but for community and connection and wellness as a whole and spirituality. And there are, I think in the Soul Quest case, well, not case, but determination, they wrapped them on the knuckles for talking about wellness. And they wrapped them on the knuckles for saying we're going to deal with your trauma because we've so over-medicalized.
But it should be okay to say, yeah, that's like, it is wellness, it is overcoming your trauma, and that's what your church should be doing for you.
Yeah.
That's why people go to church. Right? And I want that for them too.
Yeah.
I want them to find healing for their soul because we all need it. And so that it's just reclaiming those things, and it's just with some compassion, but also with some dignity. Like you don't have to, like, okay, I understand you didn't learn that, you're not hearing that. Okay, I get it. There's a lot of people, they haven't figured that out.
Yeah.
But still, like, at the same time, back up and listen. If what you're doing is harming yourself.
I don't know if we're doing Q&A, but I did just want to jump in because this panel cannot end without you all hearing just again that Joe's religious organization is only the third ever organization to be recognized by the government to engage in practices with psychedelics, and it's the first one that has no Christian elements to it. So first for that.
But I am not against Christianity, by the way.
He's not against it.
My mom is big time Catholic, and
yes.
It's like, but we just didn't want to have to look that way.
Yes.
To respect the indigenous, or the other ways.
Well, and I just want to bridge off that and say, so indigenous background and lineage, but what I'm interested in is what can we do next for you of all that are here in the audience is, we've never had a mushroom church recognized. We've never had LSD church, never had an MDMA church. All of those are going to face different levels of difficulty. I think in some ways, like I said, ayahuasca is the easier one because it doesn't really have a recreational component to it. But what do you do about something like LSD that is obviously broadly used in a recreational context? Will the government's assessment, if they choose to fight it out, mean that they can actually prohibit you? Because the standard Martha talked about, we can only interfere with your practice if there's a compelling government interest and it's narrowly tailored. I believe you could achieve recognition, not just for those other molecules and substances I mentioned, but recognizing some of my good friends in the audience, a multi-sacramental church that uses multiple plant medicines. But all of these raise the level of difficulty to another increment. And so this is where we'll see in the future how far religious freedom can go.
Yeah, my favorite quote from the UDB case that, if you've heard me talk, I say it almost every time because I find it hilarious, is they said, well, ayahuasca is definitely religious because it's not fun. And then compared it to things that were fun, which were meth and cannabis. I don't know that I agree with all of that. But it is going to be harder, and I think about psilocybin and how we have appropriated it from its spiritual ceremony use to make it a recreational substance and how it will suffer because of that. But yeah, I mean, I also would love to see an MDMA church. I probably would want to attend.
But does there need to be one?
Colorado.
Well, do they believe it?
If they believe it, sure. But I'm saying, I guess for their protection, they want to, yeah.
Well, or they believe it. I mean, I think we're getting to a point where we have to ask, what does that look like that we would be okay with, and
Is there one coming up the pipeline? Are you guys aware of this? It's not
Yes.
really there is? Is there or there's not?
There are lots of.
MDMA churches, people that are forming them and trying to get legal
Yes.
protection.
Well, in their ways, yes.
But not really.
Well, not
It is
applying
important to
presumption.
clarify that because
I
it's
can't
like this
disclose what
other.
my clients are
Allison cannot
doing,
say
but
all the things she wants to say here.
but I will say, well, sassafras,
yeah.
Okay.
right, is an indigenous sacrament, and has the same.
Is sassafras illegal?
Yeah.
It contains the same components. So, there's something to that. It's the same spirit, as someone told me once. Is she here? It's the same spirit in those substances, and it's something to think about. We've made them chemical, we've synthesized them, but there's something to that altered state of consciousness that is, for a lot of people, inherently spiritual. And so maybe there is a religious practice and belief set around that, and ceremony that increases safety with their practices. So, I like to keep an open mind. Thank you.
What else?
I
I feel like we should put Allison on the spot. If I just believe that MDMA is my spiritual practice, is that enough? I mean, what level of belief do I have to really have? I'm asking for an unnamed person in the audience. I'm asking for a friend.
That church we're going to start.
Yeah.
I think, we have those criteria of what is religion. I've not even looked at what a church is, right? Because that's sort of a different analysis. But, is there enough organization of the beliefs that you can articulate them and you have conviction around it? I mean, I think are sort of the basic tenets. And of course, we're going to look at Judeo-Christian concepts of God and hierarchy and myths and holidays and outfits, But I think there is something around an MDMA church that would make sense. The question for me is more the other two parts, is health and safety and diversion and safety and the spiritual sourcing is an interesting question.
How would you get it?
And especially, yes, when it is FDA approved as a prescribable substance.
Oh, God, yeah.
What happens then? I don't know. It's a question I ask. I was going to ask you guys.
It's tough, it's tough because we're going to come under attack ourselves for, so first is this Religious Freedom Restoration Act and the American Indian Religious Freedom Restoration Act and the long, long struggle that they went through to see that through. Mm-hmm. The devastating brutality that they faced, to bring those practices to bear and to bring that law into place. So there's a lot of people in the Native American community that aren't necessarily excited about other people coming in under RFRA, including us, because they say, oh, well, they're just, he's, with all the reasons they would try to tear us down, not enough, not this, not that, not enough. So, for me, it's like tough to hear it. It's like, ooh, they have to, give me a hard time. Like, even me, I'm just struggling, but they do, and it's there, and it's coming off of a lot of tradition, a lot of pain, a lot of struggle, and a lot of suffering. And so they're kind of like, they would like to see a lot of respect and reverence for that path. Mm-hmm. So as we go down that road, that's something to consider. Because you just said, oh, well, the mushrooms stepped out off the ancestral path, into the recreational world, and we lost some ground there. And there's room, right? We're open-minded, there it is, we're open-minded, but then you say, oh, well, we lost some ground there. Yeah. And so then there's just something that I have to say it being up here, to say these things, that it's like, there's something to that. There's something to, as they say in the peyote tradition, keep it in the medicine, like if it's medicine, meaning what I was saying earlier, holistic well-being, relationship, right relationship. So it's like that's the ancestral belief around these things. Mm-hmm. If we respect their role to do that for our health and well-being, and we maintain that, then there's alignment that supports us. And when we step out of that, then we step out, and there's consequences or there's things to work out and deal with. So when we're trying to bring that back, it's just that journey, just bringing that out in the larger context. It's like MDMA church, like how, probably NAC's not too excited to hear about that, Yeah. And it's like, well, why do these people suffer for their tradition, all these years so for that. And so like you said, you're going to have to defend yourself. So for me, like I'm in front of those people, they're going to come at me and say, you don't belong here. You shouldn't be doing that. Right. So I have to, whatever, just show myself and say, well, here's why. So that's the thing. The MDMA church, if they want to do that, just realize that's the scrutiny of the law, and it's the scrutiny of the tradition, and it's the scrutiny of the Mother Earth. It's like, so it's just like, okay, it's fine, but let's hear it. I think that's a part of it, and I say that because I really do believe that's a part of why we succeeded. Obviously, the culture has changed, the atmosphere has changed. Things are so much easier for us than it was. It's totally different than even 2009, 2006, and of course, before that. So things have really changed. At the same time, we try to respect the spiritual beliefs, the ancestral beliefs, that go back as far as we can take them, because we believe it helps us to be in that alignment. It makes things move faster. Some people don't believe that. I'm here, they said celebrating, oh, you guys did this. Oh, the first time they did that. That's how we did it. So that's what I would like to share. It's like you guys want to learn about, how to bring these things to bear. It's like deep prayer, deep respect, So that's important, and it's valuable, and it makes things go. People don't believe it, that's fine. But so then it's like, okay, where is the depth of faith? Where is the depth of commitment? Where is all that, those pieces? If it's there, okay, let's hear about it. Right. But you're standing in that circle with those people, and they suffer, to get to what they have.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, we all stand on the backs of everyone who came before us and worked so hard. Yeah.
So we shouldn't forget that. Why forget? You forget it, and you're starting over again. Every time they want to forget it. Every time they want to forget it. You're starting over again. You could have already been friends. They said, what if they didn't do the Controlled Substances Act? We'd already be 40 years down the line, towards the psychedelic psychotherapy. What if you had more reverence and respect for Native culture? Maybe you'd be a lot further along with all this whole thing. But we're just getting going, We're just getting going, so please try to remember, every time, forget it, every time. It's like, I guess you want to start over again, So for me, that's real useful. Yeah. I say it because I'm not because I'm just trying to say it, I'm saying that's useful.
I'm just going to throw your words that you said to me earlier back at you.
Let's hear it.
Which is, if we let them come up, there will be more safety and understanding and accountability, right?
And that's it. Yeah. So it's both, because they're going to come up, and then we're going to see them. Yeah.
And we can judge them. No.
We're not you say judgment,
Well, we can check them.
I'm just saying, they just have to answer to everybody. Yeah. Are they going to, I shouldn't have to hear, some Native American elder criticize me for having an MDMA church. Why not?
Yeah. Listen.
Right. Why not? That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying, no, I didn't say that. It's like I had this, no, Allison is the best. She's the best. But I just had this funny thing happen to me with this Navajo elder woman, and she said something. She said, she's so smart, and I said, oh, we're lucky we have a brainiac like you. And then she goes quietly, she says, it's a maniac. Maniac. And I said, so then I was with the other group in front of other people, and I said, she said something like, I said she was a brainiac, but she said she's a maniac. And then she looked at me, she said, I can say that about myself, but I cannot accept that from you. And so that's my thing. It's like I'm saying they're coming up, let them come up, but that's what they need to face. That's right. And why not?
I want to underline what Joe said. I mean, again, I hope I'm not sharing too much, but we literally, now this is a lawyer as a first, we literally prayed over the complaint, okay, during a ceremony. And everybody's praying over these words that lawyers wrote. So it really did matter. And this, really the spiritual foundation is what made this happen.
Yeah. We're going to go to questions, but I just want to note the Yoder case, which was the source of strict scrutiny. The that was the Amish, but what I really loved about that case, and I don't love all cases, but what I loved about that one was they talked about how their beliefs had become part of all of their life. And I think what you just described is the perfect example of that. Okay. All right. I don't know how we do questions.
Yeah, I'll be going around. Just want to say thank you all for all the work that you do, and it's such an honor to be in your presence and witness all the great work that you're doing. So thank you. Can we give it up for our panelists, please? Well, we've got about 20 minutes for questions, and I'm sure you all have a few. So I'll go around. Yeah.
Wow. Well, first of all, amazing. This is like such an incredible achievement. And Joe, wow, this, the precedent you're setting here with the, first church without like deep, time lineage, just really busting things to the next level. And I mean, personally, I do hope to see multi-sacrament churches that are sincere, and I think sincerity and love are really the real true tests. And whatever the DEA, I know all of them are important to me, but I think all of us agree if you've got sincerity and love, then that's a good. But I would strategically think that saying MDMA church, like I totally understand the reaction, Joe, you're having, and that I think just strategically, like multi-sacrament church, like that's what we should go up next is like not an MDMA church. I mean, that's like, like let's go for a multi-sacrament church where that's just part of it. I think strategically would make the most sense, just as far as branding on the cause. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, thank you guys.
Dr. Bronner.
Yeah.
Dr. Bronner.
Oh yeah, I'm David Bronner with Dr. Bronner. Yeah.
I just want to hand it over to everybody else, but just the strategy is huge. Strategy is so vital, and that's like, because people were arguing, some other group was arguing this, oh, how come you didn't help us out with that, Joe? You should have helped out with this. And I'm like, what the community needs is a win. We don't need another flaw, Exactly. So like, we have to be strategic.
That's true. Did you want to go?
Over here.
Thank you for your support, David.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Sorry, it's not a question. People do this at conferences all the time, right? So Allison mentioned that someone had said something to her about even the synthetics come from plant medicines, and those molecules have the same spirit. That was me. I'm Christine Dindisi McCleve. I am Turtle Mountain Ojibwe, and when I hear this talk about religion and spiritual beliefs, I also heard on this panel today lineage and ancestors. And I'm really touched to hear that you all prayed over it, and it's the spirit that did the work, right? So we just had a panel in this same room right before this, and I really wish there could have been like more of a continuation. Instead, we're all compartmentalized. But we were talking about decolonizing the way we're thinking. And I know you're all attorneys, except for Dr. Joe, right? And I don't fault you for that very specific way of thinking. It has a lot of use, and you all did an amazing job trying to be more holistic and integrated with a legal construct and talking about it in spiritual terms. But I think what is also missing from some of that language is, and you did acknowledge it with, the sacrifices that Indigenous people have made. And thank you, Dr. Joe, for saying that and for standing on that. I just am kind of recapping and reminding that we have to be more holistic and inclusive when we talk about how this happened and why it happened. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Christine is a writer, an academic. Everyone find her work.
Thank you, Christine.
Can you address some of the challenges or tensions between the federal RFRA and then what some of the laws are on the state level or not on the state level where they might make the protection a little more questionable?
Yeah, I'd love to take a crack at that one.
Let's
Thanks.
let the Oregon lawyer talk.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah. So, as we were talking about the RFRA, kind of the history of RFRA, that it was initially enacted in 1993 in response to this decision that Martha mentioned, Employment Division of Oregon versus Smith, which stood for the proposition that the First Amendment doesn't necessarily permit the laws of general applicability to be relaxed. Like the strict scrutiny standard that we talk about now that comes from RFRA was initially in the First Amendment, and it was basically gutted in that decision to the point where Congress took swift action. 3 years is pretty swift. 3 years later, 1993, when RFRA passed, it was unanimous in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it was 97-3 in the Senate. It was this broad-based coalition and consensus, national consensus, even in the politically charged environment of 1993 during the Clinton administration, that the nation came together united that this is something that we don't want to see ever happen again. And then, that was supposed to solve the situation, but then basically a few years later, in another Supreme Court case called, City of Bourne v. Flores, the Supreme Court found that Congress had gone too far, more than they were constitutionally permitted to go, and basically took that back away from the states. So now we live in this, and because RFRA doesn't any longer bind the states, it means that each state gets to adopt its own religious use protections or not. And there are some limits that are set by the First Amendment, but in response to that, we're now in this place where there's a complex tapestry where state by state, it's an individual analysis, and just because you pass the RFRA analysis like Church of the Eagle and Condor just did officially, finally, formally, there's still a state law analysis that you have to satisfy, depending on this First Amendment status. So this is a complex issue that I don't actually hear a lot of lawyers in this space talking about, and I would like to hear more of it because in a place like Oregon, while Oregon v. Smith was on its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, it made a stop at the Oregon Supreme Court, and the Oregon Supreme Court found that the Oregon Constitution doesn't protect, peyoteism. So the result of that is, you could be legal under federal law, but illegal under state law. And that's what we have, in a lot of places, including California, including Colorado. So that tension exists, and there's a lot of nuance. And the First Amendment does still bind states, but the question is how much religious freedom does it afford in theogenic communities? And, we've seen a lot of movement on it more recently, but, like in Oregon, where there's not a clear pathway, you have to do it through state law. So if state law doesn't give you that legal hook, then, you're taking pretty substantial legal risks, in my view. And
No, I just wanted to mention that most states have adopted the RFRA standard. I think it's 32 or 36 states have adopted that. So you're really only at risk if you qualify at the federal level in somewhere between 6 and 15 states. I say between because there's definitely like 6 that say, no way, you can't do this, and you need to be careful about those specific states, Oregon, some others. And then there's 12 or so that are uncertain. So yes, it is a compliance issue at the federal and the state level. And it's why my friend Bia Labache says, America is so complicated.
We have another question over here.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Afro-Caribbean American. I'm also a hospital chaplain with Middle Passage African Indigenous lineage roots. And with that, I wanted to know, what are the best practices for multi-sacramental churches of color? I know there was one in Detroit that had gotten shut down. Can you offer some ideas?
I think
Nothing we say is legal advice.
Right,
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
thank you.
You are not our client.
And of course, this isn't my area of specialty, but my first inclination is to say that I think multi-sacrament churches in general have a higher bar, more complex analysis. Multi-sacrament churches of color have to be extra careful. It's unfortunate, it's sad, and it's not right. And I hope someday that we don't have to make that distinction at all. And so I'm sorry that you do. Yeah, so just be extra careful with your sacrament. I don't know about the particular circumstances of that unit, of that organization. What I would say is like be extra careful to not allow yourself to be charged with distribution, trafficking. Definitely refrain from the mailing issues. One of the biggest things is making sure that there's a ritual or ceremony. You know, containment in a ritual or ceremony, I think, is super helpful. I'm a little less of a fan of doctrine. I don't think doctrine and dogma don't really help in this setting. But knowing what the medicine does for you and being able to iterate that is vital. So, yeah.
I just have a few quick comments on that. I spent 10 years as a criminal defense attorney, standing next to disproportionately black and brown defendants facing prison time for drug use. And so, as Martha said, we know the system has been, continues to be, and is deeply embedded with racism. So that's obviously a first challenge. But in terms of multi-sacramental, the law, I think you would need, if you wanted a stronger argument, you would want to show why every single one of those things is central to your practice. That it's not as if I could have a psilocybin, ayahuasca, and Wachuma church, and I could say, well, ayahuasca is a pathway to the divine, and Wachuma is also a pathway to the divine, but psilocybin is nice and it's helpful and it's useful, but it's not really critical. We could do those other two, and the point is that each one needs to be critical to your practice. Why is it that if we took this away from you, that you would not be able to practice your spiritual practice? Because if there was this marijuana church once where they said, "Oh, what's your doctrine?" And they said, "Well, we want to be good people." Okay, great. Do you have to use marijuana to be good people? Well, no, you don't have to use, and they were just like, boom. If it's not central to your belief, then we can take it away from you. Now, again, this is, and some in the room might quibble with this, that there's a way you could maybe get there without this, but this would be a stronger argument that each one of these things individually is essential. So that's one thing, how to do multi-sacramental. Another would be, yes, I think the synthetics are a harder sell for law enforcement. That MDMA and LSD and other molecules, I just think you're in a more sympathetic position with natural medicines, but I'm not saying that will guarantee you'd be safer, but they know that MDMA can be used as a party drug. They know that LSD is that way. I think they're more open to an idea that mushrooms are religious, that ayahuasca is religious, that mescaline is religious. So there's many things you could do to improve your situation, but we could talk after as well. Read the church guide that Allison wrote.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I think that part of the, and I haven't explored the Detroit the situation like really, really deeply, but my impression of it is that the way that they were doing it really sort of resembled more of a dispensary style operation than it did, and like Martha was saying, you need to have a ceremony, and if the DEA is worried about diversion and trafficking, and if the way that the church administers its sacrament kind of closely resembles a trafficking operation, it's just going to be at higher risk. And so, some churches have, prior commitments that are needed to be done before they're able to access it, and things like that can kind of, again, improve or strengthen the defensibility of it, as opposed to just distributing with kind of de minimis upfront requirements or involvement with the community. And then specifically, like, and Sean was touching on this point really well, about each sacrament needs to be, needed and necessary. And I think being able to articulate how they're different and why they're all needed, but also how they're different from each other, and why, any particular one missing would be, really cause an injury or damage to the community and to the church, would be the two kind of things I'd offer for that.
Thank you. That's a great question. We don't have a whole lot of time left.
Hey guys, thanks for your words, but more importantly, your work. Words are good though. My name is Dove Korfkorn. The organization that I work for, Lakota People's Law Project, Sacred Defense Fund, we do land defense, indigenous sovereign. We have to talk afterwards. I've been told. But I know. But we do land defense, sacred sites defense, things like that. One of the biggest obstacles in court to tribal sovereignty is, there's an irony. Like there's the Beckett Fund, which supports religious freedom, but from this kind of weird conservative stance. But for brochures, it wants to be on the same page as Muslims and Native people, et cetera. But we run up against this establishment of religion thing. So the view of, you guys know this probably better than me, but anytime the court might make a ruling that could favor a Native religion or a tradition or a non-Christian tradition, it's argued by conservative far-right evangelicals that that's an establishment thing. We live under some pretense that we have religious freedom in America. The Constitution just says there shall be no establishment of a religion, but none of us are blind to the fact that America was established as a Christian country. I'm not a Christian, I wasn't born a Christian, but 90% of Americans are of Christian descent. Over 70% identify as Christian, right? So if you're living in a country where protection of religious freedoms comes down to you ensuring that your claim doesn't appear to be a front to establish another, right? So my point to you guys is, how often do you come up against that in your work? What are your responses to it? And yeah, I don't want to live a delusion, but it's very hard to convince a Christian court in a Christian country that your religion deserves protection when we all kind of know that Christian exists as like a hegemonic culture, glue, that if you're not part of that edifice, you're not really welcome to push your own view. So yeah, that's my question. How do you deal with that establishment clause? And thank you.
I think that what we're doing is that, which is to push through examples of religion that isn't the majority, to show that there is respectful people with sincere beliefs doing what may not be the majority well, and to increase safety. And it's going to be people like Joe and other churches that stick their necks out that are going to show examples to destigmatize and show examples of other religions that are, I hate to say the word, but like validatable. And I think that's a lot of what we sometimes work on, and sometimes it may feel like we're crafting religious beliefs, but what I say is, let's use language that these oppressors will understand. And it may be their language, like church. Yeah.
I would just add that, I think compared to a lot of other countries, like there is more religious freedom here. Like that's actually a fact on the planet Earth. And so this is probably one of the best places that we have that option to protect diversity, right? Even without hegemony, with those biases in place, this is, doesn't get that much better than this in a lot of relative countries, number one. So we're in a pretty good position that way. And that is part of the value system that a lot of people do believe in, even though they may have these other religious tendencies or cultural tendencies. And then on top of it, well, we're here in the Americas, and the indigenous tradition here is, so it's ancestral, foundational to the country, to every part of it, to every aspect, and probably to a certain degree of bloodline to a lot of people walking around. So then to ask for protection for indigenous belief systems here, where the powers that be, the culture at large, is clearly concerned about their view. The children coming up are like, whoa, this is not working. So as far as the superiority of the cultural viewpoint, it's falling apart. You know, I don't think anyone's going to say, oh, let's go. There are those that will preach that and are pushing that, but there's a lot of people saying, whoa, where are they taking us? So there is an open-mindedness coming from the suffering that's being created from that kind of thinking that is leaving people to at least open their minds, for example, to indigenous beliefs. And so that is the spirit of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, the prophecy. The prophecy said the time will come when the eagle culture, the Western culture, will see, whoa, like, this isn't enough. And so then they will make room and respect these beliefs that they mistreated for so long. You know, and it is happening, you know, it is happening more than ever before. You know, where we can bring up these topics and Christine's going to stand up and speak in front of everybody. Like, that, you know, I don't know, you go to different conferences, it wasn't happening, like now it is. So I don't know, I do feel like it is happening, and I do feel like there is a big hope for that to happen here.
I'd like to add something to that. As a team, I don't think that we encountered a difficulty around the Establishment Clause, although they are in tension with one another. We were reliant primarily on RFRA. We brought a number of constitutional claims. Those were actually dismissed at the motion to dismiss, leaving our RFRA claim to survive. So we actually didn't expect that the other claims would survive anyways. But one of the things that we did do as we moved into the complaint writing was consult with the Native American Rights Fund's lawyers. And we spent some time with them and asked them what would they advise us. And the one thing that they told us, and we absolutely did, was that we would not rely on an equal protection claim. So we did not do that. My understanding was that the UDV case did, that was upsetting to the Native American people who did not want other people to rely on the work that they had done and the suffering that they'd encountered. So we actually did not do that on purpose. Our RFRA claim could stand on its own, that's fine. The medicines, to a degree, have a comparable quality to them, meaning peyote and ayahuasca in their religious nature and their spiritual nature. So there is some comparison there, but there was absolutely no reliance on the prior suffering of the Native American people and their work.
I just want to make sure everybody understands what that means. It means we did not say because Native Americans can use peyote, this church should be able to use ayahuasca. You could try to say that, but that was an example of the way we modified the complaint to not disrespect indigenous traditions.
Well, what we did say was if Santo Daime, who already passed the test, and UDV already passed the test, and if those guys learn from indigenous people about ayahuasca, how come those people are being left behind out of the equation?
We did say that.
We did say that.
We said
and that's true
protection.
because we were coming from hanging out with Amazonians in Peru. They're like, yeah, what about us? You know, how come UDV is okay and Santo Daime is okay?
Yeah.
And they accepted that, you know? I mean, that what they did, as it turns out. We didn't even have to go to court over that. They were just like, oh,
Sure.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say on the equal protection question, the Supreme Court has had some pretty major sweeping changes to that. I forget the name of the case, but it was a high school football post-game prayer case that just radically upended kind of the prior jurisprudence there on the Lemon test. So I don't know how long ago you were having trouble with that, but we have such a very religiously fanatical Supreme Court right now that's really upending kind of lots of years of precedent, and even though I think overall that's probably not necessarily great for the country, it's actually really good for this movement. So how that would pertain to land use battle or land development battles or mining battles on sacred sites to Native people in the United States, it might just be a different landscape now than it would be before, and I'm happy to talk with you later if you want.
Well, thank you all for paving this path forward. All that you're doing is really setting a beautiful precedent, and we all really appreciate the work you're doing. So thank you. Can you please give it up for our panelists one more time? Thank you.